Do you believe in ghosts, my fellow Toastmasters? Most welcome guests?
No.
I didn't, until it was a steamy summer night, and my girlfriend Susan and I had just driven from Athens, Georgia to Atlanta to visit my old buddy Paul. Paul was living in a many-gabled, tumble-down Victorian house in the somewhat seedy little Five Points section of Atlanta. We'd been college roommates and had forged a fast friendship. When Paul invited Susan and me for an overnight visit, we jumped at the chance. We arrived at Paul's house and were delighted to see another old friend, Don, who lived in a different part of town. After a delicious, peppery Thai dinner at a neighborhood restaurant, we repaired back to Paul's, for we had a lot of catching up to do. It had been years since we were all together. As the night grew long and conversation ebbed, Paul offered Don a lift back to his place. Susan and I would stay behind. Paul would be back shortly. We were sitting on the sofa, absorbed in conversation, when a persistent tapping sound interrupted our tete-a-tete. It was light and rhythmic and seemed to be emanating from Paul's dining room. We got up to investigate, and we walked toward the dining room, and as we did, the sound stopped. Mysteriously, it stopped. We sat back down again. What's going on? A few moments elapsed, and suddenly the rhythmic rapping resumed, somewhat louder than before. Again we got up to investigate, and again the knocking stopped, right as we approached it. We sat back down, now shaken and somewhat alarmed. What was going on? Soon the front door opened, and to our immense relief, Paul arrived home. I'll never forget his words. "You guys look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't possibly have known how insightful those words were. We spilled our story to Paul, and he took it all in, wide-eyed. And just as we finished, as if on cue, the knocking started up again, even louder than before. We all got up to investigate this time, and we moved toward the source of the noise. And then it happened. More than 25 years later, I still get chills whenever I think about it. As the knocking continued, we moved toward the spot. Suddenly, the rapping intensified. It began to swirl around us, encircling us, enveloping us in a cocoon of terror. We gripped each other in horror, and Paul cried out, "That's it, we're leaving!" And as abruptly as it started, the knocking stopped. It took mere seconds for Susan and I to gather up all of our belongings. And as we scurried out the door, we could hear the knocking start up again, only this time it was a pounding staccato. Boom, 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 boom. Something was taking delight in terrifying us, something that defied explanation. We piled into the car for the trip to Paul's, where we would all spend the night, taking refuge from our nightmare. Don was surprised to see us, and even more so to witness our panic. But Don was a sensitive soul, and he agreed that things weren't right at Paul's. Paul returned home in the morning, while I never again set foot in his place. In the weeks to come, Paul relayed to me other mysterious, unsettling occurrences, and how his dog, his protector, a somewhat formidable German shepherd, would cower under his bed whenever things went bump in the night. Ultimately, Paul was able to exercise his restless spirit. He took to reading aloud a biblical passage every night about the casting out of demons. We joked that Paul's ghost simply grew bored with this nightly ritual and moved next door, where they had the good grace not to subject it to an unneighborly harangue. We joked, and that was a way of coping with the fear. We joked, but with an undercurrent of uneasiness. Paul would eventually move away to a brand new townhouse in the suburbs, and we would be left with a haunting memory of a steamy summer night in Atlanta, Georgia. Upon seeing the ghost of his murdered father, the King of Denmark, Hamlet tells his skeptical friend Horatio, "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy." How true. How very, very true. Mr. Ghostmaster.
Artie, thank you so much. That's the first time